A short look to Mendel's genetics by Pablo Tinoco, codominance and multiple alleles. Before starting explanation, it would be very good to state a vocabulary for better understanding, of course. So starting, we have the alleles. The alleles are each alternative form of a gene. The gene is the unit of heredity transferred to the offspring, while the traits are a specific feature of an organism. So the traits could be the color of the hair, the color of their eyes, etc. The genes will define that specific trait, and the variation of the genes are called alleles. Mendel's theory states that the allele that will be expressed will be the dominant one. This here theory is called the dominance theory. So the recessive allele will only appear if there is no dominant, and the dominant allele will be the one expressed. So, talking about genetically and the genes, heterozygous are the ones that have two different alleles for a same trait in the same genotype. Could be a dominant one and a recessive, or it could be two dominant, two recessive, etc. The homozygous is the opposite, is having two identical alleles of the same genotype. So the genes will be in the carrier, that is the organism that have a specific allele in the genotype, and the phenotype is the physical characteristic of an organism, while the genotype is the genetic characteristics of an organism. For example, you could have a recessive allele in the genotype, but it will not appear in the phenotype. So this is the first example for a more basic understanding. So first we have two parents, one homozygous and one heterozygous. The heterozygous have one dominant allele and one recessive allele, while the homozygous one have two recessive alleles. In this example, the yellow color will be the dominant allele, while the green will be recessive. So in this square, each one represents one offspring, one being, one son. And also take into account Mendel's theory that states that in the moment of the gamete formation, each allele will be divided. So in the first two examples, we have two heterozygous offspring, which they have one dominant allele and one recessive allele in their genotype, while in their phenotype they are yellow. And the other two are homozygous, which have two recessive alleles in their genotype, and in their phenotype they are green. Now, what you saw before was a Mendelian case of inheritance, a case or an example of a cross that follows the laws of Mendel, of dominance and segregation, etc. But here are some patterns more complex that are known as non-Mendelian inheritance patterns, which are incomplete dominance, codominance, multiple alleles, and polygenic traits. But in this case and in this video, we'll only going to talk about codominance and multiple alleles. So, in codominance is a pattern that occurs when two individuals, each one of them have a different allele. They both have in their genotype two genes that are the same and dominant, but they differ from the other one. So when they mate, their offspring will show both of them. So in this case, like an example, we have two individuals that they both have different forms of a same gene, meaning that they have two different alleles, and the genotype is homozygous. So we have a white cow that is homozygous and have the dominant allele of the color white, and the red cow that is also homozygous only have the dominant allele of the color red. So when they mate, their offspring will show both of them. So we have cows with red strips and they are white. They will both see the same. The people ask what is the difference between a codominance and incomplete dominance. Well, the principle is the same in both cases, but the phenotype will be different. So incomplete dominance is the same. They have two different individuals that have two different alleles. Both are dominant, and when they cross, instead of both alleles be shown in the offspring phenotype, they will combine and make a new one. For example, we have a red rose and a white rose, and when they combine will be a pink rose, but they will not show the red or nor the white. But in codominance, the offspring phenotype will show both colors, both alleles, and that's the main difference. Now we have multiple alleles. That means that they are traits who have more than two forms, meaning that it could be more than one way of black. In this case, we're gonna see a little example of blood. We have O negative and O positive. Both are mostly the same, but they are really different indeed. Now, continuing with the example of blood, blood have many variations of the same allele. It have multiple alleles. You have more than two, more than three, more than four, and sometimes uh, this is more complex to track because it do not follow the same laws of Mendel. Indeed, the codominance is another non-Mendelian inheritance. So it is very important to learn more about how this type of combinations work. Now you have to also take into account at the moment of taking track that we live in a world with full biodiversity, in a place where there are many different environments, and in fact that the environment also take into account in the moment of inheritance. You have also to take into account the theory of evolution, that the species evolve in order to adapt to their environment. So the environment play like the 50% of the effect in the phenotype of and genotype of the species. And indeed, if a species develop an ability that help him to live in a certain environment, it will also trespass it and inherit to their new offspring. And this is a great answer because Darwin's theory, yeah, it plays a major role in understanding genetics, but also the environment is very important to take a track. For example, the butterfly, there will be many variations, and some evolve in order to develop abilities such as camouflage or heat difference. A bear in the North Pole is going to be totally different in a bear in a forest because of the temperature, and this happens with all the species, and this rule applies to all living things in the world. Thank you a lot for hearing me. This is explanation was based in the Mendelian theory of genetics and the Darwin theory of evolution, and the non-Mendelian experiments were based on an article created by Lindsay Van Nommeren, a naturalist that studies this type of patterns. And thank you for hearing me. I'm Pablo Tinoco from Altamira, and thank you for hearing my explanation of genetics.